A Legend of the Northland by Phoebe, Cary. A ballad is a form of poetry where there is a noticeable narrative which has been set to rhythm, music, and beat. The poet attempts to directly converse with the reader in what could be called a dramatic monologue. While the more popular ballads are about love, there are others which are folk tales, much like the one in your portion. Ballads are quite versatile, contrary to popular belief. Take this extremely beloved ballad for example. The Beatles' Hey Jude. More often than not, stanzas in a literary ballad have alternate lines that rhyme. So it's either the second and fourth verse which rhyme or the first and third one. So that would be ABAB or ABCB. Let's now look at this poem which effortlessly narrates a valuable lesson. Away, away in the Northland, where the hours of the day are few and the nights are so long in winter that they cannot sleep them through. The poet tries to paint a picture of the life that is lived in a faraway land called Northland. The days are short and the wintry nights are long. In fact, the nights are so cold that people find it difficult to even sleep, where they harness the swift reindeer to the sledges when it snows, and the children look like bears' cubs in their funny furry clothes. To further elaborate on the kind of life lived there, the poet talks about reindeers which are tied to sledges as a means of transport, and about little children who look adorable in layers and layers of fur clothes because of the cold. They tell them a curious story. I don't believe 'tis true, and yet you may learn a lesson if I tell the tale to you. The poet introduces this curious myth that is often narrated in Northland, but confesses that the truthfulness of the story is something she cannot guarantee. Regardless, she believes that merely hearing the story might teach an important moral lesson to the listener. Once when the good Saint Peter lived in the world below and walked about it preaching, just as he did, She begins the story like any other, with a classic "Once there was a," hence keeping the mood light and cheerful. She introduces our first main character, Saint Peter's, who was one of the apostles of Jesus Christ. Now, Saint Peter's was walking around preaching to the world about the world like he always does. He came to the door of a cottage in traveling round the earth, where a little woman was making cakes and baking them on the hearth. The second main character is introduced, a little woman who bakes cakes. Saint Peter seems to have come to a lady's cottage who was making cakes on the floor near the fireplace, and being faint with fasting, for the day was almost done, he asked her from the store of cakes to give him a single one. Saint Peter, who was terribly exhausted from fasting all day, was on the verge of fainting. He asked the little lady for a cake from the many that she had baked and stored. So she made a very little cake, but as it baking lay, she looked at it and thought it seemed too large to give away. Obliging to the hungry man's pleas, the lady bakes him a tiny little cake. But despite its small size as compared to the rest of her cakes, she still felt that this one was too big to be given away. Her materialistic mind had taken over her philanthropic heart. Can you think of situations where you have wanted to help someone out, but suddenly realized it was too good to be given away for free? Don't worry, this must have happened to all of us at least once. And it is only human to feel so. It is up to us to move past it and perform the good deed anyway. Therefore she needed another and still a smaller one, but it looked, when she turned it over, as large as the first had done. So she bakes him another one, a much smaller one. But she still felt that it was just as big as the one she baked before. Then she took a tiny scrape of dough and rolled it flat and baked it thin as a wafer, but she couldn't part with that. So now she resorts to a different method. She took a tiny scrap of the dough and rolled it until it was thin as a wafer. But despite how thin and small and insignificant its size was now, she still could not find it in herself to give it away. For she said, "My cakes that seem too small, when I eat of them myself, are yet too large to give away." So she put them on the shelf. The little lady thinks to herself, when she eats the cake herself, she feels them to be too small to satiate her hunger and leaves her wanting for more. But the same cakes feel too big to be given away. This dialogue of hers clearly reflects her state of mind. She is greedy and is too hesitant to give some cake away. So she puts the cakes back on the shelf, briefly forgetting about Saint Peter, who was starving for some food. Then good Saint Peter grew angry, for he was hungry and faint. And surely such a woman was enough to provoke a saint. The calm saint could stand it no longer. He was weak and hungry, and this greedy woman's actions provoked him and left him infuriated. And he said, "You are far too selfish to dwell in a human form, to have both food and shelter and fire to keep you warm." He opens her eyes to the amount of privilege she possesses. She had food and shelter and even some fire to keep her warm. Despite this, she was greedy and hesitant to give some cake away to the starving saint. He says that she was far too selfish to even exist in a human form. Her actions had made her inhuman, heartless, beast-like. "Now you shall build as the birds do, and shall get your scanty food, by boring and boring and boring all day in the hard dry wood." The saint curses her. Now she will build like birds do, scavenge for food like birds do. She will have to bore into dry wood all day long to search for some food. She will have to defer through this alone, every day, to understand the value of sharing. Then up she went through the chimney, never speaking a word, and out of the top flew a woodpecker, for she was changed to a bird. Without a word, the little lady turned into a bird and flew out of the chimney. And out came a woodpecker, thanks to the saint's curse. She had a scarlet cap on her head, and that was left the same, but all the rest of her clothes were burnt, black as a coal in the flame. While a scarlet cap remained on her head, the rest of her clothes burned black as coal. All her material possessions were up in flames, leaving her in a body of a simple, basic bird with nothing of its own. And every country schoolboy has seen her in the wood, where she lives in the trees till this very day, boring and boring for food. Now, every schoolboy to this day sees her in the woods every day, where she is pecking and pecking continuously for some food. The word boring here has dual meaning. One is boring for food in the wood, and the other is reflective of how monotonous her life is now.